Some people believe that miracles only happen in daylight, in bright visible moments when everyone can see God's hand at work. But the truth is different. The deepest miracles happen in the middle of the night, in hospital corridors lit by fluorescent lights, in rooms where machines beep and families weep and nurses move like silent angels through the darkness. This is where God does some of his most tender, most powerful work. Because he sees the people no one else notices, the ones who keep working when their own hearts are breaking, the ones who hold strangers' hands while their own world falls apart. This is a story about one of those people, a woman who spent her life caring for the dying, and how God, in his perfect timing, brought her back to life. A story about a woman who thought faithfulness was a shield against suffering, who believed that if she did everything right, worked hard, prayed constantly, served others selflessly, then God would protect her from the kind of pain that breaks people beyond repair. But life doesn't work that way, and when everything she had built came crashing down in the space of a few brutal months, she discovered something far more powerful than protection. She discovered that God doesn't always save us from the storm. Sometimes he walks through it with us, and that makes all the difference. I have a powerful testimony to share with you today, but I need you to promise me something. If you stay until the end of this story, you will see how God works in mysterious ways. Subscribe now so you don't miss any testimony that could be the exact message your heart needs today. And tell me in the comments, which country are you watching from? And let me ask you, have you ever felt that God answered a prayer when you least expected it? I want to hear your story. Her name was Margaret Hawkins. She was 61 years old, a white North American woman with tired yet dignified features, short gray hair that she kept neatly trimmed, and a steady gaze that held decades of silent pain and unwavering strength. She lived in Dayton, Ohio, in a simple wooden house that once belonged to her parents, a house filled with memories of laughter and loss, of family dinners and quiet prayers, of a life built slowly and carefully over many years. Margaret was a night nurse. For over 25 years, she had worked the overnight shift at an overwhelmed public hospital, caring for patients whom many already considered lost causes. The terminal cases, the uninsured, the ones whose families had stopped visiting, whose bodies were failing, whose time was running out. These were Margaret's people. She moved through those dark corridors with a calm presence that felt almost sacred, holding trembling hands in the middle of the night, whispering quiet prayers while changing bandages and adjusting machines, offering dignity to people the world had already written off. Her colleagues knew her as the veteran nurse who never calls in sick, reliable, competent, unflappable. They didn't know about the rosary she kept in her pocket, the one she had inherited from her mother and touched whenever she needed to remember that she wasn't working alone. They didn't know that she prayed over every patient, not just the ones who asked, but all of them. Silent prayers that God would ease their pain, give them peace, help them feel loved in their final hours. Margaret believed that nursing wasn't just about caring for bodies. It was about honoring souls. She had the kind of face that had seen too much suffering to ever look truly young again, but there was something beautiful in it, a gentleness, a depth, a quiet grace that made dying patients reach for her hand instead of the doctor's. Her voice was soft but steady. Her movements were efficient but never rushed. She had learned, over decades of watching people die, that the greatest gift you can give someone in their darkest hour is simply to stay, to be present, to not look away. Margaret's faith was the foundation of everything. She attended Mass every Sunday morning after her Saturday night shift, sitting in the back pew with her eyes barely open, exhausted but faithful. She read scripture every evening before work. She believed, truly, deeply believed, that God saw her service, that it mattered, that faithfulness would be rewarded, not with wealth or recognition, but with protection, with stability, with the quiet assurance that if she did everything right, God would keep her safe. She had lived her whole life according to that belief, and for 61 years it had seemed to be true. Margaret's life had never been easy, but it had been steady. She had raised her son, Daniel, alone after his father walked out when the boy was 3 years old. She had worked double shifts to keep food on the table, to pay for school clothes, to save for a future that always felt just out of reach. She had sacrificed sleep, health, social life, everything to give Daniel a chance at something better, and he had grown into a good young man, not perfect, no one is, but kind, hard-working, trying his best to find his way in the world. By 2025, Daniel was 28 years old, working construction, living in his own apartment, calling his mother every Sunday like clockwork. Margaret was proud of him, proud that despite everything, despite the poverty, the absent father, the years of struggle, he had turned out okay. She had done her job. She had kept him safe. She had raised him in faith, taught him to pray, showed him what it meant to serve others. And for that, she was grateful. But October 2025 brought the kind of phone call that shatters the world into before and after. Daniel had been at a party, nothing wild, just friends celebrating a birthday, and on the drive home, a drunk driver ran a red light and T-boned his car. The impact was catastrophic. Daniel survived, but barely. By the time Margaret arrived at the hospital, still in her scrubs from her own shift, her heart pounding so hard she thought it would burst, he was already in surgery, skull fracture, internal bleeding, broken ribs, a medically induced coma to give his brain time to heal. Margaret stood outside the ICU and felt something inside her crack. This was her son, her only child, the person she had spent her entire adult life protecting. And now he was lying in a hospital bed, hooked up to machines, fighting for his life, and there was nothing she could do. She couldn't fix this. With hard work, she couldn't pray it away. She couldn't trade places with him no matter how desperately she wanted to. All she could do was wait and watch and trust that God would be merciful. November brought the second blow. The hospital's insurance, Daniel's insurance, would not fully cover the cost of his treatment. Margaret read the letter 3 times, certain she had misunderstood. But the words were clear. Tens of thousands of dollars in medical debt. Bills that would bury her. Financially. Bills she had no way to pay. She worked at a hospital, for God's sake. She understood medical debt, had watched it destroy families, had seen patients choose between treatment and keeping their homes. And now it was happening to her. At the beginning of December, while Margaret was still spending every free moment at the hospital beside Daniel's bed, another catastrophe arrived. She was being investigated for an administrative error in her unit, a medication discrepancy that had occurred during one of her shifts. Margaret knew she hadn't made the error. She was meticulous, careful, triple-checked everything. But someone had to be blamed, and she was the senior nurse on duty. The investigation could cost her not just her job, but her nursing license. Everything she had worked for over 25 years could be taken away because of something she didn't do. Just days before Christmas, a doctor, a kind man Margaret had worked with for years, pulled her aside in the hallway and said the words she never imagined hearing. "Margaret, I need to prepare you. Your son may not wake up. The brain swelling isn't improving. You need to start thinking about what comes next." Margaret nodded, thanked him quietly, and walked to the bathroom where she locked herself in a stall and vomited from the sheer force of the grief and terror crushing her chest. The night before Christmas, Margaret finished her shift and drove home through empty streets decorated with lights that felt obscenely cheerful. She had been working non-stop, caring for dying patients all night, then sitting with Daniel during the day, then going back to work again. She hadn't slept more than a few hours in weeks. Her body was shutting down. Her mind was foggy, but she kept moving because stopping meant facing the reality she wasn't ready to accept. When she walked into her small wooden house, the silence hit her like a physical blow. The Christmas tree she had put up weeks ago, before the accident, when she still believed Daniel would be home for the holidays, stood in the corner, unlit, mocking her with its false promise of joy. The table was covered in medical bills, bank notices, letters from the hospital's legal department about the investigation. Margaret stood in the doorway, coat still on, and stared at the wreckage of her life spread out before her. Outside, the Ohio winter was brutal. Snow fell steadily, piling up against the windows. The wind howled, rattling the old wooden frames, finding every crack and gap in the house's defenses. Inside, the heat barely worked. Margaret had turned it down to save money, and now the cold seeped into everything. She could see her breath in the air. The storm outside was vicious, but the storm inside her was worse. She sat down at that table, still wearing her coat, and looked at the bills. The numbers blurred together. Tens of thousands of dollars she didn't have. A house she was about to lose. A job she might not keep. A son who might not wake up. Everything she had worked for, everything she had sacrificed, everything she had believed God would protect her from. It was all collapsing at once. The weight of it was crushing, suffocating, impossible to carry. Margaret reached into her pocket and pulled out the rosary, her mother's rosary, worn smooth from decades of prayers. She held it in her trembling hands and felt something break inside her. Not dramatically, not violently, but completely. God, she whispered into the cold, empty house. I have done everything right my whole life. I have served you. I have cared for your people. I have raised my son in faith. I have never asked for much, never complained, never turned away from the hard work you gave me. Her voice broke. Why is this happening to me? What did I do wrong? The house was silent. The wind howled. The bills sat untouched. And Margaret stayed at that table for hours, clutching the rosary, waiting for an answer that didn't come. When she finally stood, stiff, frozen, exhausted beyond measure, she made a decision. She would keep working. She would keep showing up. Not because she felt strong, not because she understood, but because it was all she knew how to do. That night, Margaret returned to the hospital for her shift. She moved through the corridors like a ghost, checking vitals, administering medications, holding the hands of dying strangers while her own son lay in a coma 3 floors above her. She pretended she was fine. She smiled at colleagues. She did her job with the same calm competence she always had. But inside, she was drowning. And no one noticed. No one asked. No one saw. At the end of her shift, just before dawn, Margaret went upstairs to Daniel's room. She wasn't supposed to. Visiting hours were strict and she wasn't on duty in that unit, but she went anyway. She sat in the chair beside his bed, took his hand in hers, and prayed. Not a hopeful prayer, not a faithful prayer, just an honest one. God, I don't know what you're doing. I don't know why this is happening, but I'm here. I'm still here. And I'm not letting go. In the first week of January 2026, something unexpected happened. A terminally ill patient named Angela was admitted to Margaret's unit. She was in her late 70s, frail and gaunt, her body ravaged by late-stage cancer. The prognosis was clear. Days, maybe a week at most. Angela had no family listed in her chart, no emergency contacts, no visitors. She was one of the forgotten ones, the patients who would die alone in a hospital bed, their passing noted only by a time stamped on a chart. But when the charge nurse was making assignments for the night, Angela did something unusual. She asked, specifically, clearly, with surprising strength in her failing voice, for Margaret to be her nurse. I want the one with grey hair, she said, the one who prays. The staff looked at each other, confused. How did Angela know about Margaret? She had just been admitted. She had never been in this hospital before. But the request was noted, and Margaret was assigned to her care. Margaret entered Angela's room with the same professional calm she brought to every patient. But something about this woman stopped her. Angela's eyes, still sharp despite the pain, still alert despite the medication, locked onto Margaret's with an intensity that felt almost uncomfortable. She didn't speak at first. She just watched, studied, like she could see straight through to the broken, terrified heart Margaret had been hiding beneath her nurse's uniform. Over the next few nights, Angela barely spoke. But every time Margaret came into the room to check vitals, adjust the IV, offer medication, Angela would reach out and take her hand. Not weakly, not tentatively, but tightly, desperately, like she was holding on to something precious. And she would hold on for minutes at a time, just staring at Margaret with those sharp, knowing eyes. It unsettled Margaret deeply. She was used to comforting, dying patients. But this felt different. This felt like the patient was trying to comfort her. One late night, January 3rd, the shift dragging on endlessly, Margaret was adjusting Angela's pillows when the old woman spoke for the first time in days. Her voice was barely a whisper, rough from disuse and pain, but the words were clear. "You are not here just to care for bodies. You are here to save souls." Margaret froze, her hands still on the pillows. "What did you say?" Angela's eyes were closed, but a small smile played at her lips. "You heard me. You think you're just a nurse, but God has been using you for something much bigger, and He's not done with you yet." Margaret felt tears prick her eyes, tears she couldn't afford to shed in front of a patient. She finished adjusting the pillows, murmured something about needing to check on other patients, and left the room. She stood in the hallway, back pressed against the wall, trying to steady her breathing. How could this dying woman, this stranger, see so clearly what Margaret herself couldn't? How could she speak words that felt like they had been pulled directly from Margaret's unspoken prayers? Margaret returned to Angela's room an hour later. The old woman was awake, staring at the ceiling, her breathing labored but steady. Margaret pulled up a chair and sat beside the bed. Not as a nurse this time, but as something else. A fellow traveler. A woman who needed to hear whatever Angela had to say. "How did you know?" Margaret asked quietly. "How did you know what I needed to hear?" Angela turned her head slowly, her eyes finding Margaret's in the dim light. "Because I've been where you are," she said. "I lost my daughter 40 years ago. Car accident. She was 23. I spent years asking God why her, why me, why faithfulness didn't protect us from suffering." She paused, gathering strength. "And then I learned the truth. God doesn't promise us protection. He promises presence. He walks through the fire with us. And sometimes the fire is where we learn who we really are." Margaret's tears fell freely now. She didn't try to stop them. "My son is in a coma," she whispered. "The doctors say he might not wake up, and I don't know how to survive if he doesn't." Angela reached out and took Margaret's hand again, that same tight, desperate grip. "You will survive," she said firmly, "not because you're strong, but because God is, and He has work for you to do, Margaret, work that can only be done by someone who has walked through this darkness and chosen to keep believing anyway." They sat together for a long time, nurse and patient, two women bound by suffering and faith. Margaret told Angela everything, about Daniel, about the medical bills, about the investigation, about the house she was about to lose, about the crushing weight of doing everything right and still watching your life fall apart. And Angela listened. She didn't offer platitudes, didn't promise everything would work out. She just listened and held Margaret's hand and prayed quietly while Margaret wept. Before Margaret left that night, Angela said one more thing. "I'm going to die soon. I know that. I've made my peace with it. But before I go, I want you to know something. You have treated me with more dignity in 3 days than most people showed me in my entire life. You see me. You care. And that matters more than you know. Don't ever forget that, Margaret. What you do matters, even when it feels invisible. Especially when it feels invisible." Margaret bent down and kissed Angela's forehead gently, something she rarely did with patients, but this felt right. "Thank you," she whispered. You've given me something I desperately needed." Angela smiled. "God sent me here for you. I know that now. I'm glad I could help." That night, Margaret went home and knelt beside her bed and prayed differently than she had in months. Not asking for things to change, just asking for the strength to endure whatever came next. And for the first time since Daniel's accident, she felt a small, fragile spark of peace. The investigation intensified that same week. Margaret was called into a meeting with hospital administration and told she was being temporarily suspended, pending the outcome of the inquiry. The words felt like a punch to the gut. She was being sent home, barred from the unit where she had worked for over 2 decades, from the patients who needed her, from the only place where she felt like her. Life still had purpose. She cleaned out her locker with shaking hands, said quiet goodbyes to colleagues who looked at her with pity and suspicion, and drove home in stunned silence. When she arrived at her small wooden house, there was another letter waiting. This one from the bank. Foreclosure proceedings would begin within 30 days due to missed mortgage payments. The house her parents had left her, the only stability she had left, was about to be taken away. Margaret stood in her driveway, holding the letter, and felt the last thread of hope snap. Everything was lost. Everything. That night, suspended from work, facing foreclosure, with Daniel still in a coma, Margaret made a decision. She drove back to the hospital, even though she had no authorization to be there. She parked in the visitor's lot, used her old badge that hadn't been deactivated yet, and went up to Daniel's room. She sat beside his bed, took his hand in hers, and let herself fall apart completely. "Daniel?" she sobbed. "If God wants to take you, I trust him. I do. I don't understand it, but I trust him. But if he wants to give you back to me, if there's any chance..." Her voice broke. "I promise to live differently. I promise to stop trying to earn his love. I promise to just receive it." She stayed there for hours, holding her son's hand, praying, crying, surrendering. The monitors beeped steadily beside her. Daniel's chest rose and fell with the help of the ventilator. Nothing changed, but something. Inside, Margaret shifted. Not hope exactly, but acceptance. A quiet willingness to trust God, even if the answer was no, even if Daniel never woke up, even if she lost everything. She would still believe. She would still choose faith. Not because it made sense, but because it was all she had left. That same night, while Margaret sat vigil beside Daniel's bed, Angela passed away peacefully 3 floors below. Margaret didn't know until the next morning when she checked her phone and saw the message from a colleague. "Angela Johnson passed at 3:47 a.m. Thought you'd want to know." Margaret sat in her car in the hospital parking lot and wept for the old woman who had seen her, who had spoken truth into her darkness, who had reminded her that her work mattered even when it felt invisible. The days that followed were the darkest of Margaret's life. With no job to go to, no purpose to distract her, she spent every waking hour at Daniel's bedside, unauthorized, technically trespassing, but no one stopped her. The nurses on his unit knew her, pitied her, looked the other way. She watched the monitors, memorized the rhythms, prayed constantly. But Daniel didn't stir. The doctors remained grim. The prognosis unchanged. The bills continued to pile up. Collections agencies started calling. The bank sent another letter, this one more official, more final. Margaret stopped opening mail, stopped answering the phone, stopped pretending she had any control over what happened next. She had surrendered everything to God. Now she was just waiting to see what he would do with the wreckage. One particularly brutal day in mid-January, Margaret sat beside Daniel's bed and felt something she had never felt before. Anger at God. Real, raw, burning anger. "Is this what faithfulness gets me?" she said out loud, her voice sharp and bitter in the quiet room. "I've spent my entire life serving you, caring for your people, putting others first. And this is how you repay me? By taking everything." She waited, half expecting lightning to strike her for the blasphemy, but nothing happened. Just silence. And somehow, that silence felt like permission to be honest, to be angry, to stop performing faith and just feel the truth of what she was carrying. That night, Margaret didn't pray. She just sat in the darkness of Daniel's room and let herself be broken, let herself feel every ounce of pain, fear, and despair she had been suppressing for months. And when she finally spoke again, it wasn't a prayer. It was a confession. I don't know how to do this anymore, God. I don't know how to keep believing when everything I believed in is falling apart. I need help. I need you to show me something, anything, that tells me I'm not alone in this. The next morning, January 15th, a date Margaret would remember for the rest of her life, she woke in the chair beside Daniel's bed to the sound of alarms. Her heart stopped. She thought he was coding, thought this was it, the moment she had been dreading. But when she looked at the monitors, they weren't flatlining. They were responding. Activity, movement, brain activity that hadn't been there before. A nurse rushed in, then a doctor. They checked Daniel's vitals, examined the readouts, exchanged looks of confusion, and then Daniel's eyes, his beautiful, familiar brown eyes, opened for the first time in months, slowly, groggily, like someone waking from a very long sleep. He looked around, disoriented, and then his gaze found his mother. "Mom!" The word was barely a whisper, rough from weeks of intubation. But it was the most beautiful sound Margaret had ever heard. She sobbed, loud, ugly, grateful sobs, and grabbed his hand. "Daniel! Oh my God, Daniel, you're awake! You're awake!" The medical team was stunned. They ran tests, checked his responses, tried to find a medical explanation for his sudden improvement, but there wasn't one. The brain swelling that had been so severe, so resistant to treatment, had inexplicably resolved. Daniel was awake, weak, confused, with a long recovery ahead, but awake, alive, back. Margaret stayed with him through the barrage of tests and examinations, holding his hand, crying, thanking God over and over. And then, in the middle of this impossible joy, her phone rang. Hospital administration. Her heart sank. She had forgotten about the investigation, about her suspension. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. "Margaret," the voice on the other end said, "we need you to come to a meeting immediately." She arrived at the administrative office still in yesterday's clothes, her face swollen from crying, her hands shaking. She expected termination, expected them to strip her license, escort her out, finalize her ruin. But when she sat down across from the hospital's chief administrator, the woman's face was apologetic. "Margaret, we owe you an apology. The investigation has concluded. It wasn't your fault. An automated dispensing system failed, logged medications incorrectly. We've identified the technical error. Your record is completely clear. Your license is restored, and we'd like you back on staff immediately." Margaret couldn't speak, couldn't process. Daniel was awake. The investigation was over. Everything she thought was lost was being handed back to her. "I don't understand," she finally whispered. The administrator smiled gently. "Sometimes the system fails us. We're sorry it took this long to figure out. But you're cleared. Completely." Margaret walked out of that office in a daze. She went straight back to Daniel's room and sat beside him, her son, awake and smiling weakly at her, and felt the full weight of God's mercy crash over her. But the miracle wasn't finished. A few hours later, a hospital social worker arrived with unexpected news. "Margaret, are you familiar with a patient named Angela Johnson?" Margaret nodded. "She passed last week. She left a will, and she designated a significant portion of her estate to create a fund for uninsured patients and healthcare workers in crisis at this hospital." The social worker paused. "Your son's case has been selected as one of the first to receive support. Most of his medical bills will be covered, and there's additional assistance available to help you avoid foreclosure on your home." Margaret's legs gave out. She sat down hard in the chair, hands over her face, sobbing. "Angela." the dying woman who had held her hand and told her God wasn't done with her yet. Angela had done this, had seen Margaret's suffering and, with her final act on earth, had reached out to save her. "She knew," Margaret whispered. "She knew what I was facing, and she helped me." The fund Angela created covered the majority of Daniel's medical expenses, an amount so substantial it felt impossible, miraculous. The hospital worked with Margaret to apply the remaining assistance toward her mortgage, preventing the foreclosure that had felt inevitable just days before. Within a week, the crushing financial burden that had been suffocating her was lifted. Not entirely. There were still bills to pay, still a long road ahead, but the weight was manageable now, survivable. Daniel's recovery was slow but steady. He moved from the ICU to a regular room, then to a rehabilitation facility. He learned to walk again, to speak without slurring, to remember things that had been lost in the fog of the coma. Margaret visited him every day, marveling at the miracle of his presence, his laughter, his future that had been given back when all hope seemed lost. Margaret was reinstated at the hospital, not just as a floor nurse, but with a new role. The administration, recognizing the depth of her compassion and her unique understanding of patient suffering, asked her to coordinate a new spiritual and emotional support program for patients and families facing terminal illness or catastrophic medical crises. It was exactly the work Angela had described, not just caring for bodies, but caring for souls. The program started small, Margaret and one social worker meeting with families, sitting with patients, offering presence and prayer and practical support. But it grew quickly. Other hospitals heard about it. Donors stepped forward. The fund Angela created became the foundation for something much larger, a network of support that touched hundreds of lives. And at the center of it all was Margaret, transformed by her own suffering into someone who could sit with others in theirs without flinching, without offering false hope, just offering truth, that God is present even in the darkest valley. Margaret began training other nurses in this work, teaching them what she had learned through decades of night shifts and months of personal crisis, that the greatest gift you can give someone who is suffering is not answers, but presence. That dignity matters more than efficiency, that a hand held, a prayer whispered, a moment of genuine compassion can change everything. Her own pain had become the very thing that equipped her to help others survive theirs. By spring, Daniel was living independently again, back at work, rebuilding his life. He and Margaret had grown closer through the ordeal. The easy relationship of before had deepened into something more profound, more honest. He started attending church with her, asking questions about faith, about how she had survived those months when everything fell apart. And Margaret told him the truth. "I didn't survive on my own strength. I survived because God held me when I couldn't hold myself." The spiritual support program continued to expand. What had started as one woman's mission became a movement. Margaret partnered with local churches, trained volunteer chaplains, created resources for families navigating end-of-life care. She spoke at nursing conferences, sharing her story, not to get attention, but to remind other healthcare workers that their work mattered, that their compassion saved lives in ways metrics and charts could never measure. She started a support group for healthcare workers facing their own crises, nurses drowning in medical debt, doctors grieving patients they couldn't save, staff members struggling with burnout and moral injury. Margaret's small wooden house, the one she had almost lost, became a gathering place. Every Tuesday evening, people came. They sat around her kitchen table, drank coffee, told their stories, and reminded each other that they weren't alone, that faith could survive doubt, that God worked in darkness as much as in light. Angela's legacy lived on in every person the fund helped, every family who received support during their darkest hour. Margaret made sure that Angela's name was attached to the program, that people knew this hadn't come from a wealthy philanthropist or a government grant. but from a dying woman who had seen another woman's suffering and chosen to do something about it. "She saved me," Margaret would say simply, whenever anyone asked. "And now we get to save others in her name." Daniel became involved in the work too, volunteering when he could, sharing his own story of miraculous recovery with families facing similar situations. He talked openly about the accident, the coma, the uncertainty, and about waking up to find his mother sitting beside his bed, still faithful, still praying, still there. His testimony gave hope to families who had been told to prepare for the worst. And every time he spoke, Margaret watched with tears in her eyes, grateful beyond measure for the gift of her son's life. The hospital where Margaret had worked for 25 years in relative anonymity became a place where her name was known, where her presence meant something. Not because she sought recognition, she never did, but because her work spoke for itself. Patients asked for her by name, families requested her support, and Margaret showed up again and again, carrying in her own healed heart the proof that suffering doesn't have the final word. Months later, on a quiet evening in late spring, Margaret returned home with Daniel walking slowly beside her. He was fully recovered now, strong, healthy, alive in ways that still felt miraculous every time she looked at him. They shared dinner together at the kitchen table, the same table that had once been covered in bills and foreclosure notices, and talked about ordinary things, work, friends, plans for the summer. After Daniel left, Margaret went to her bedroom, closed the door, and knelt beside her bed. This time she didn't ask for anything. She didn't beg or plead or question. She simply bowed her head and wept. Tears of gratitude so deep, so overwhelming, that words felt inadequate. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for holding me when I couldn't hold myself. Thank you for walking through the fire with me. Thank you for showing me that faithfulness isn't about protection. It's about presence." She understood now what she couldn't have. Understood before the storm, that God doesn't promise to spare us from suffering. He promises to meet us in it, that sometimes the greatest miracle isn't being rescued from the darkness, it's discovering that God's hand has been holding yours the entire time, even when you couldn't feel it, that the trials that nearly destroyed her had actually transformed her into exactly who she needed to be, to do the work He had prepared for her. Margaret Hawkins' story didn't end with fame or wealth or a perfect life free from pain. It ended the way most true miracles do, quietly, humbly, in the sacred stillness of a life surrendered to God. She continued her work at the hospital. She continued sitting with the dying, holding trembling hands, whispering prayers in the darkness. But now she did it differently, not as someone trying to earn God's love, but as someone who had experienced it in the deepest valley and knew it could never be lost. This is the truth Margaret's life taught the world. God sees those who serve in silence. God transforms trials into purpose. God moves when everything seems lost. And sometimes the greatest miracle is not just surviving the storm, but feeling the hand of God holding you steady in your darkest moment and knowing with absolute certainty that you were never, ever alone. If you made it this far, it was not by chance. God placed this story in front of you because you needed to hear it. Now I want you to do something for me. Subscribe to the channel so you can keep receiving these stories that feed the soul. And in the comments, tell me which country you are from and share this with me. What did this testimony leave in your heart? Is there something in your life you need to surrender to God today? Share your prayer, your pain, or your joy. Here we are a family and your story matters.